Welcome back. Our last video on quicksort. Good riddance, if you ask me. We're going to talk about the time complexity and space complexity of quicksort. So first off, notice that best and average are both O of n log n, which is the same as merge. And if we look at y, let's look at best case, for example. So here's our array, and we have to make a decomposition, and then another decomposition, another one, just like we did with merge sort, where the pattern here, as n grows, we have to make log n, log base 2n decompositions. So as we have more elements, for example, if we had 32 elements, we have to make 5 decompositions, slice it in half 5 times. If we are, and this is the best case, remember, we're going to see the worst case in just a moment. If we have, I don't know, what's next, 64, we would have to make 6 decompositions. So that grows at the rate of log n. But then each level, each decomposition that we have to make O of n comparisons per decomposition. So that's happening when we're pivoting. Remember, when we're finding the pivot, we're comparing to every other element one time. So that is how we get n log n. It's very similar. It's the same reason, really, why we got n log n with merge sort. But now let's talk about worst case. So with our algorithm, our pivot function, it takes the first item as the pivot always. Now that's problematic if our data is already sorted. So here's the worst case for our current quicksort. If we have this array and we're trying to sort it, and of course our code doesn't know that it's sorted, so we take this in, and the very first thing we do is find the first item and use that as the pivot. Well, we compare it to every item in that array, but nothing is less than it. So the next array, that decomposition really only gave us a single item. We have this entire subarray left. So every time we go through, each decomposition is only one item that we're pivoting on. And so everything moves to the right side with our current algorithm. And we have to keep going and going and going over and over and over because we're only taking the first item and it's already sorted. And then for each one of those, so that is n decompositions. The worst case with our current setup is O of n decompositions, and on each level, each decomposition, we have to make O of n comparisons, which results in O of n squared, quadratic time, for the worst case. So basically the problem arises when the pivot that is chosen is the minimum element every single time, or the pivot is always the maximum element. So to fix that, in this example at least, if we're dealing with a sorted array, we could get around it by, instead of pivoting around the first item no matter what, pivot around a random item. Just pick anything in here, it doesn't matter, just pick a random item. Or try and pick the middle element every time. And that way, even if we have a sorted array, we can avoid the problem. But of course, there's still a chance that if we pick the middle element every time, it's possible that the array is unsorted and it's supposed to be in random order, or we think it is, but somehow we're always picking the minimum every time. We can never avoid that worst case entirely because the way the algorithm works, if you're pivoting around the minimum or the maximum repeatedly, that's going to be quadratic time. But we can just do our best to avoid the chances of constantly picking the minimum or the maximum, which is why you would do a random number or the median instead of the first element every single time. But by doing that, what we did, picking the first element every time, it allows me to illustrate this problem, the worst case scenario. So take a deep breath. That was quicksort. That's a lot, I know. Again, do not feel any pressure to be able to write that on your own. It's really more about understanding how it works, being able to walk through. If you had a whiteboard, could you write down the values of the array each time through? Could you diagram out the recursion? That's the sort of thing that I hope you took away from this. Okay, moving on.